Hello, Florence, my lovely. All right, they're in the middle of Pamplemousse is getting arrows shot at him. We're gonna figure out where these are coming from. Flora settled on the bench with her back to the house. Pamplemousse looked a little green around the gills, but followed suit. Wordlessly, the two took turns picking wooden letter tiles, each the size of a chopping board, from the stack next to the court. Shenanigans scanned the house to see if any of the windows were open. The arrow must have been shot from somewhere high. The archers on the top of the castle always had advantage over those on the ground. Flora finished setting her letter tiles on the side of the board where Pamplemousse and the assembled spectators couldn't see. She sat back, fidgeting slightly. Pamplemousse cleared his throat. I did say you could go first, he said. Another arrow landed, this time a millimeter from Flora. She flinched, and Fauna started forward, only to reel back as a fresh arrow struck the ground in front of her outstretched foot. The message from the murderer was clear. Only Flora was allowed to move. With trembling hands, Flora removed the paper from her arrow. Griffonage, she read. She began to place the tiles on the board. So I guess that's the word, which I've never heard of, that the shooter picked. Pamplemousse may have been many things, a fool, a dandy, a cartoon of a man, but he was certainly good at Scrabble. For a long time, there was no sound but the click of tiles being set down, the thwack of arriving arrows making Shenanigan jump less and less each time one soared over her head. In vain, she squinted repeatedly toward the house. She scanned for sly shadows, dim figures, anyone skulking, a flicker of movement with ill intent. But it was impossible to make out anything through the light bouncing off the windows. Pamplemousse managed to get galumphing on a double-letter score tile. Thwack. The arrow countered with unobserved. Pamplemousse began to sweat. Razzle, he spelled. Frazzled, it countered. He looked a bit frazzled himself, murmured Phenomena, eyes fixed on the game. Ah, he could have played mitochondria there. If he loses, do you really think he'll be killed? Whispered Shenanigan. Pamplemousse had very clearly called for Scrabble to the death. Phenomena didn't answer, fixated on the game. The sunlight crept to the second floor. It would be peeking in at Aunt Schadenfreuder's window now, lighting her up where she lay on the desk like a medieval saint. Not for the first time, Shenanigan half wished her aunt were here to bang her stick and put a stop to this. Then a cloud passed across the sun. In a brief second, when the light dimmed, Shenanigan saw a figure silhouetted on the roof of the house, next to the chimney above her room. She caught her breath, and then the cloud passed. The sunlight hit the roof and turned the figure's eyes into two huge round points of light. She saw the shape of the murderer, and the murderer saw the shape of her. Shenanigan lurched forward, but before she could take 2 steps, an arrow whistled down, tearing a chunk out of her trousers and pinning her leg to the ground. The crowd gasped, and Fauna grabbed Shenanigan, hauling her back behind her. I can see them, shouted Shenanigan. They're on the roof. Let me go. Fauna shook her head wordlessly, her fingers finding the hole in Shenanigan's shin. There was blood. The arrow had just barely grazed her leg. She had worse falling out of trees, but Fauna looked terrified. Her eyes met Shenanigan's, and for a moment that cracked upon something in Shenanigan's chest, she reminded Shenanigan of her mother. Things were going badly for Pamplemousse. He was sweating buckets now. He kept lifting up his powdered wig to mop his brow. Phenomena kept track of the points in her notebook and chewed on the end of her ponytail as she marked down the score. Trepidation put Pamplemousse, filling almost all of what little space remained on the court. They all waited for the arrow to arc down from the high, carrying the final move. Thwack! It landed in the middle of the court, scattering the center tiles. Flora calmly unrolled the piece of paper. Absquatulate, she read. The word intersected neatly with Pamplemouse's buoyancy, ending right over the final triple word score. Pamplemousse stared at the board, uncomprehending. Then he leapt up, knocking back his remaining tiles with such force that Ferrier had to dodge out of the way. There were high spots of color in Pamplemouse's cheeks. You cheat! You have not won!" he cried, stabbing a finger toward the roof of the house. "Absquatulate is not a word." "I should hope it is," called a small man near the back of the crowd. "It's my blooming name." Pamplemousse began to kick the tiles off the court, puffing in fear and exertion. Flora sat down hard on the bench. There was an awful, expectant silence. The rest of the family looked at each other, unsure. No one wanted to be the first to try to leave in case they were fired upon. Pamplemousse had scuffed all of the tiles into gibberish. He drew his sword with one hand, his ancient palm pistol with the other. His eyes were wide and staring. He fired wildly into the trees, the lawn, the clouds, and when his pistol was empty, he pulled a dagger from his boot, but there was nothing he could do. He looked toward the roof. They all heard the distant whistling. In his last moments, Pamplemousse must have seen flying towards him his opponent's final move. "Merde," he whispered. That means murder. The arrow struck him in the chest like a full stop. Shock and horror slackened Forna's grip. Shenanigan tore free and was off toward the house before Pamplemousse hit the ground. Phenomena shouted her name, but no further arrows fell, and Shenanigan crossed the lawn unpunctured. She burst indoors, was momentarily blinded by the glooming dark of the hall after the bright morning outside, and took the staircase on all fours for speed. If you had asked her what she planned to do if she caught the person who shot Pamplemousse, she would not have been able to tell you. She was barely thinking at all. Her body had become a machine, her legs pistons, her lungs bellows. Her all driven by one thought that barely was a thought, more a foot on the accelerator of Shenanigan's brain. Catch them, catch them. She ran to her room, threw open the skylight, and pulled herself onto the roof. Let's stop there for a second, and you can see the arrow spinning or flying towards poor Pamplemousse. It was cool, and the stones were still damp with morning dew. For a moment, a tall shape loomed in her vision, but it was only the chimney against which the archer had been leaning, still in shadow. Shenanigan sprang forward, expecting to see a figure with huge, blazing eyes of an insect. She saw nothing. The roof was empty. Below on the lawn, she could hear shouting, and doors slammed open and shut all over the house. Looking over the little stone parapet at the edge of the roof, she could see figures swarming over the body of Pamplemousse like ants around the crumb of a cake. Blood was settling into the grooves of the Scrabble court, surrounding Pamplemousse in a red grid. Someone was calling her name. Shenanigan ignored them and leaned against the warm brick. She was exhausted. This part of the roof formed a little courtyard flanked by chimneys, which was why Shenanigan had picked it as one of the best of her secret places. With a lurch, she realized that unless they had felt like shimmying up 3 floors of drainpipe, the archer must have wriggled up through the skylight as she herself had done so many times before. The murderer had been in her room. They had picked their way across the mess on her floor, climbed on her bed. She felt sick with rage. They had left something behind, though. Propped on the parapet, In a snug little corner where a large chimney met the wall was Shenanigan's backpack, the one she had prepared for her escape once she had found the treasure. Placed neatly on the top where she was sure to see them were her own binoculars. Oh, that's the end of chapter 19. Let's begin chapter 20. It's called Cold Case. There was a roaring in Shenanigan's ears as she looked out over the parapet, and her shin throbbed dully. Those who had witnessed the fatal Scrabble game recounted the event to newcomers with great enthusiasm. She watched their hands move in wild and silent gestures, pulling back and releasing an imaginary bowstring, pointing to the roof, where perhaps she was visible, a small figure lurking in the murderer's shadow. Someone had covered Pamplemousse with a sheet. It was draped clumsily over the arrow, which no one had bothered to remove, making it look as if it were lying in a very small circus tent. Candor hurried across the lawn, his big square doctor's bag in hand. He took a peek under the sheet and shook his head. Flora still had not moved from her seat, but Fauna had helped pick up all the arrows around her and handed them to Candor. Two burly cousins loaded Pamplemousse onto a makeshift stretcher and carried him away. Shenanigan! Shenanigan came back to herself with a start. Earth looked as if they had been yelling at her for some time. Are you all right? I was watching from the dining room because Gran said I couldn't go out, but she's run off, and I just thought, the body. Shenanigan snapped to attention. Right. This time there was an actual dead body to investigate, not just an unconscious one or a bloodied hole in the carpet. Phenomena would want to take a look. Shenanigan thought fast. Okay, Candor will be taking Pamplemousse to the freezer with Gumshoe. Phenomena will have followed me. She's just not as a fast runner, so we'll scoop her up, and then I can keep Candor distracted with my leg while you two investigate. All right, we can... Oh, no. Earth looked stricken. They dropped back into Shenanigan's room and dived under her bed. Shenanigan felt her stomach plummet into her shoes. When Earth reappeared, dust was graying their hair, and their hands were empty. John the cat's gone, they said wretchedly. Shenanigan, the murderer had to have come here, through here. What if they hurt him? Panic and rage locked Shenanigan's limbs. You go with Phenomena. I have to find him. You don't. You're the one with the bad leg. You have to get Phenomena into the freezer. I'll find John the cat, I promise. We'll meet at the top of the grand staircase when we're done. Earth's face was grave and set. Go. Shenanigan ran down toward the kitchens as fast as she could hobble, meeting Phenomena just as her sister reached the first floor, and spinning her back the way she came. She coughed, Body! And because Phenomena was both very clever and very used to Shenanigan, she understood immediately. They paused by the stairs to the kitchen. The burly cousins who had carried Pamplemousse's body passed them on their way out, licking ice lollies. Shenanigan focused hard on the pain in her leg. She didn't lie, but she did act. The trick to acting was to find a bit of truth and pull it around you like a raincoat until it's covered your whole body. In this case, the truth was that her leg hurt. She staggered down the stairs, groaning dramatically. My word! Candor's hands were full of arrows Fauna had given him. He looked around frantically for somewhere to put them, gave up, and finally tossed them into the furnace. Shenanigan, you're bleeding. It hurts a little, but it's nothing compared to poor Pamplemousse. Shenanigan put a hand to her forehead and risked a surreptitious glance into the freezer. She could just make out the dim white shape of Pamplemousse's sheet and, deeper inside, one of Gumshoe's scuffed shoes. If the killer kept this up, the family was going to run out of room in there. Pamplemouse's weapons had been removed from the body and piled on the kitchen table. Shenanigan spotted some throwing stars, a beautiful stiletto dagger, and a palm pistol he had shot at the ceiling. Her fingers itched to swipe it, but instead she threw herself into a kitchen chair with another theatrical groan. Candor dragged over his doctor's bag and crouched in front of Shenanigan, who waved Phenomena in over his shoulder while he was pulling on a fresh pair of surgical gloves. More quietly than Shenanigan would have given her credit for, Phenomena crept down the stairs toward the freezer. "What happened?" asked Candor. "I was shot with an arrow, that's all, during the Scrabble game." From Shenanigan's point of view, she could see her sister's elbow, her ponytail, and a small part of Pamplemouse's sheet as her sister began her investigation. "Oh, that's all. She says, though with the way things were going, I supposed it could have been much worse," Candor sighed. He pushed his glasses up his nose, turning her leg this way and that. "This whole business, first Auntie, then Gumshoe, then Pamplemousse, and now you, a mere child, caught in the crossfire. What has happened to this family?" He shook his head, looking so much like a sad Labrador that Shenanigan almost patted him on the head. Up close, exhaustion was written all over him. He had dark smudges beneath his eyes, and his hair stuck up in little tufts. He took a small bottle out of his bag. There were many more inside, clinking softly, and Shenanigan bet Phenomena would love to rifle through them, although, from what Shenanigan could see, she was currently rifling through Pamplemouse's pockets. "I'm going to clean this now, and it's going to sting a bit. Hey, Shenanigan, what do you call a skeleton that goes to the doctor?" "I don't..." Her legs stung fiercely, and she stifled a yell. "Late," said Candor, dabbing at her shin with a cotton ball. Sorry. Honestly, after this weekend, it's a wonder Daisy still wants to marry me. I told her all about us, you know. The Swifts are an old and noble family, I said. You'll be marrying into a grand legacy, I said. And what greets her? A run-down house, a chilly welcome, and murder. Just hold that for a second. Thank you." He took a pair of tweezers and gently removed some grit she had managed to get in the wound. "The Swifts used to do great things, world-changing things," he said wistfully. He took gauze and tape out of his bag and began bandaging her leg. "We've been inventors, poets, soldiers, translators, politicians, and now we just scrabble among ourselves. If I were patriarch, I'd..." He scratched idly at his hand, chuckling. "Oh, never mind. Could you even imagine?" "I think you'd be a good patriarch," said Shenanigan. "Maybe Aunt Schadenfreude will ask you when she wakes up." "Oh, no." "People would like you more, I think. Flora said Aunt Schadenfreude's not very popular, which makes sense, because she can be mean sometimes." "She was rude to Daisy, wasn't she?" allowed Candor. "But I expect that was a misunderstanding." There was a soft shuffling sound from the freezer. Phenomena, unable to reach whatever she was after, was dragging over a crate of frozen meatballs on which to stand. "Candor, how long have you known Daisy?" Shenanigan asked. She asked it loudly to cover the noise. 3 months, 1 week, and 3 days. A dreamy expression crossed Candor's face at the mention of his favorite subject, and he smiled a goofy smile. 3 months? And you're getting married already?" "Time doesn't matter when you're in love," said Candor. "When you know, you know." "Yes, but..." she struggled internally. On the one hand, Candor should definitely know that his fiancée was up to something. But on the other, if she told him and he didn't believe her, he would definitely tip Daisy off. Behind Candor, Phenomena stuck her head around the door, and gave Shenanigan an enthusiastic thumbs up. "Hang on, I'll get you a pack of ice for that," said Candor, turning toward the freezer. Phenomena's face briefly registered alarm before she ducked back into the freezer and out of sight. Shenanigan thought fast. "Wait, Candor, if Daisy was keeping something from you, would you want to know about it?" Candor turned around. He looked puzzled. "Daisy tells me everything. She's always trusted me completely. It's one of the things I love most about her. It's just, On Schadenfreude not letting her marry you? That's motive, isn't it, for a murder? It took Candor a second to react, and when he did, he surprised Shenanigan by laughing. You think Daisy? She could never. And besides, that's not even a very good motive. Daisy knows nothing will stop me from marrying her. Our love is too precious. Even if I was excommunicated, cut off, disavowed. Again, his glasses slipped down his nose, and he pushed them back up sheepishly. Now that I think it'll come to, not that I think it'll come to that. When Aunt Schadenfreude wakes up, she'll change her mind. Daisy Swift, it sounds so lovely. And she is lovely, Shenanigan, isn't she? Oh, yes, said Shenanigan. She has lovely eyes, and she smells nice. All right, let's stop in the middle of that conversation. We'll pick up again and see if we can get Phenomena out of the freezer without Candor noticing. All right, my lovely, until we read again, happy birthday. Oh, tickle.